I think we'll start with some introduction. You're the
sure.
non-profit.
So my name is Roberto Cassabi. I work at the British Heart Foundation, which is a UK non-profit. We research. We spend money on research into heart disease, but also spend a lot of money and information on prevention and care. And I manage the social media and online communities team at the BHF. Been there about 3.5 years. Been in non-profits about 7. So yeah, that's me.
Speak well in the mic, yeah. If you don't
Exactly.
mind. Yeah. And so you've been there for 3.5 years, but this social media team, how old is it?
So I've been, my job actually came as an organisational, cultural, sort of strategic shift in terms of at the BHF. So we integrated our digital and PR teams, and my role came as part of that. And my main job then, 3 years ago, was to sell in social media internally, which is something that I think is very important. It's changed a hell of a lot now. But back then it was very much about selling in the use of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well.
All right, Euan, you have plenty of activities. Can you give us a brief overview of what you're doing, and then you will end with NFP Voice?
Yep. I started off doing this stuff, I guess, 12 years ago, long before it became known as social media, and was at the BBC at the time, so I deployed internal bulletin boards, forums, wikis, the whole range of technologies. But then left 6 years ago to freelance, and a lot of my work is with commercial organisations. But a couple of years ago, I was asked to become a director of NFP Voice, a company set up to support charities and not-for-profits in the use of social platforms. And did so very much with the angle that I watched, basically the industrialization of social media. I watched lots of commercial organizations and marketing firms taking on something that I thought was much more organic and individual. So the orientation of Voice is very much to help organizations speak for themselves on the web rather than doing it for them. And we've worked with a range of charities over the last couple of years.
All right. So we're going to content right now. Roberto, can you give a brief overview of what you're doing on social media for BHF?
So social media for us at the BHF is a real key part of how we use communication. So for us, it gives us a real chance to talk to our supporters and donors and those who need our information. So the way that we use social is we try not to silo social. So we integrate it into all of our communications. So we don't think, oh, we have to bolt social on at the end. We think about it as a 360 approach when we do anything in communications. On a day-to-day, we will engage with hundreds of thousands of our supporters. We'll give them information. We also act as a bit of a conduit as well to those who have heart disease and have heart conditions, so that they can meet other people, and they can do that via our social channels, and that's great to see. And we run obviously campaigns, and as part of our campaigns to give people information, we put social at the centre of that too. And something that we did recently, in January, which really was, in my view anyway, the culmination of 3 years' work for me at the BHF, was a campaign we did with Vinnie Jones. It was where he was sort of part of this video, and we put social at the centre of that campaign, not as a bolt-on. So we didn't just produce a video, we produced a YouTube-friendly video, and we used Twitter to release that video before. It was a TV advert as well, but we released it 5 days before on our social channels. And 3 years ago when I first started, if I'd suggested that, I'm not sure I would have, I think I've been laughed out of the room, but after 3 years selling in internally, we were able to put social first. And also tailor, and I think that's the key, is that we tailor our communications on social for that audience, rather than thinking we can, just reshape something that is built for TV or PR and make it social. We try to think about it from the centre rather than bolting on the end.
What do you think about this strategy to have something tailored to each one and to each social media?
Well, I think it's interesting, because I mean, we were talking earlier about the fact that lots of people rush into using all of the platforms and all of the different tools, and in many cases spread themselves too thinly. And the other thing that I was thinking when Robert was describing that was the fact that he was having to sell the activity into the organisation, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, that in any organisation, but almost particularly in charities, they're quite conservative with a small c, and trying to persuade them to engage with their audiences in this way is really quite difficult many times, which seems a shame, because almost more than commercial organisations, I think they've got this fantastic opportunity to have genuine engagement with people who care about what they're doing. It's not like selling packets of crisps or whatever. They're involved in things that matter and that make a difference in the world, and have so much prospect to tap into the willingness and the enthusiasm of the people who follow them. But very often, part of their organisations make that difficult. You know, that if you're the 20-year-old who's been asked by a charity to tweet because you're the only one who knows how to use a computer, then it's a bit intimidating if you're then representing that organisation to the whole of your constituency. And of course, if things go wrong, people who don't quite understand what you're doing will then jump on you from a great height. So I think some of those issues are non-trivial.
Yeah, sorry, technical. What about your Twitter campaign? I wanted to focus on that a little bit.
So yeah, I mean, as part of that campaign, the campaign came about is that we had this challenge, is that we wanted people to give hands-only CPR. So that is, we know that if people get CPR in the early stages that they collapse, the rates of survival double. So we wanted to put this message out there, and we chose quite a risky strategy. We had this very tongue-in-cheek. We had Vinnie Jones, and he was sort of giving CPR. And the way that that we released it was actually on Twitter first. 5 days before it was on TV. We naturally sort of released it to our audiences and integrated our press work on the same day. And then the next day we used Twitter. We trended 5 times naturally on that day. And the next day we used Twitter promoted trends and products, and we reached about we got 7% engagement across all, which compared to normal sort of display ads of, or even Facebook ads to some extent of 0.2-3%, the 7% was fantastic, and yeah, it was a busy time, but and we chose the hard and fast hashtag, so the hashtag was hard and fast, and Twitter at midnight is when it went live is a darker place than you expect it to be during the day. So that was I was fearing for my job at 3 a.m. when that went live, that's for sure. But luckily, people saw the story arc, so they then went back to see what does this mean, and they came back to realise that it was our campaign, and yeah, it was risky, it was funny, and I think that's what worked well on Twitter, is that it was risky and it was a bit funny. Because
you were one of the first brands to use promoted trends in the UK, right?
Yeah, so yeah, that's correct. So I think we're the first UK charity, and we're one of the first handful of brands in the UK to use them. And yeah, I mean, I think for the right campaign, I think they're very effective and also cost effective.
So this is something you will recommend to any non-profit and any brand?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you have to get it right. I think it needs to be for the right sort of campaign, the right sort of ask. I think you need to really embed yourself in the culture of Twitter. You can't just have sort of a brand name. I think it needs to add something to the community, and I think that's what we thought we were doing, and that was the strategy. We wanted to add something funny and shareable, and the video and the hashtag, it was exactly that. I think if you picked a brand name and then had a promoted tweet, I'm not sure you'd get as much traction. And the promoted tweets in timeline as well, I think they're really underrated as well, and they're very cost effective.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask a question, if that's all right. I mean, did you get any connection back? Did you get people wanting to engage? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was overwhelming, actually. I mean, we're still 6 months later going through the data. But in terms of what we got back, I mean, we found over 20 people who, and we're still talking to these people, and we've released these people in sort of as, and we've written blogs on these people who've, after seeing the advert and seeing the information on Twitter, have said that they then saved someone's life, and that has been fantastic. I mean, that's sort of the key KPI, really. We're sort of the advert and the video has actually genuinely sparked people off to actually save people's lives, and we're thinking about phase 2 at the moment, and I think it's going to be very much more engaging and using that sort of collateral already. But yeah, I mean, we were overwhelmed when you see tweets saying that people had seen the advert and the video, and that they performed CPR and the person survived, and we have obviously sort of followed that up, and that's been absolutely incredible, really.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about voice and all the activities you're having. How is your model, and what's the main challenge your clients, I mean, non-profits have right now on social media?
Yep, and in our case, the non-profits extend to government groups as well. So okay. Sylvia Presley, who's our head of client services, who's in the audience, has been working with the European Union and other organisations as well. And I think the level of experience that most people have is so basic at the moment that they are initially wary. So even just, if you like, selling into the organisations in itself is a challenge. It's more cautious than the commercial sector, if you like. Partly because budgets are tight and they see it as an extra resource that's going to have to be funded, and they don't always have the money for that. Once you get in, then, of course, there's a whole raft of questions about who's going to be engaging online with who and why. And, very often, again, with commercial organisations, there's the organisational person who maybe meant to be doing it or organisationally is in the position where they should be doing it, aren't capable or aren't interested in engaging online. So Sylvia has to find her way through, who's going to do this, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, and then teaching them just the basics.
Okay, really basics.
Yeah,
like how to post, what to post.
Totally, and how to react. Because many of these people haven't really used this in a work context. They may be using Facebook or Twitter as an individual and personally. And it's easy to underestimate the challenge, as I say, of being that person who's representing this institution. You're still a person. You're still the one who presses save on that tweet. But what you write and how you write it is not easy for them. And then once you start, of course, then the consequences begin to become apparent, because you're opening up these sets of connections and relationships with people that you haven't had before. So I characterise the problem as there's no point trying to be 2.0 outside the firewall when you're not even 1.0 inside it. So kind of one of the big things that we're wanting to get into is helping these organisations deploy the tools internally so that they can get better at reacting more quickly, working out collectively how they react, and then making the response better when they come out to the rest of the world.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that the biggest challenge, and I think I totally agree with you in terms of culturally, internally, I think that is you need strong leadership and you need belief that that's the right way to do it, with social especially. Companies and non-profits are similar to others, are not necessarily, especially traditional ones, not necessarily built to be social internally. So that is a big culture shift, and we're quite lucky at the BHF in that we work in a really integrated way, but that needs to come from the leadership, and I think that if you don't have that culture in your internally, then you're going to struggle to be social as a brand externally.
There's also the kind of effectiveness aspect of it, because a lot of my focus is on the inside of organisations, and I watch. I'm a trustee of a charity, and I'm involved in a number of them, and watching them burdening themselves with bureaucratic processes that just mind-numbing, take up time and effort and energy. Whereas deploying some of these tools inside the organisation could allow them to be much fleeter of foot, much better able to do more with the money that they have. But that's a big cultural shift.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I've heard horror stories of, sign off for tweets, involving 3 or 4 people, and I'm not surprised. Luckily, that doesn't happen at VHF, and hopefully it never will be on my watch. But other organisations, and it hinders and it stops engagement. And I think one of the challenges is pace. Is that you need to be agile internally to be agile externally, and social is, by definition, quick and spontaneous sometimes. You can have your planned campaigns, but I totally agree. I think it's very important to get the culture right internally.
And do you think stepping into social media will make non-profit concentrate more on the content side? Because when you're as a brand, when you want to, and I think that was previous speakers speaking about it, you need some content. It's not you cannot only ask for people to give, and that's it.
And that's again something that you don't see, I don't think, enough of. That it's still holding people at arm's length, if you like. And my big thing would be, if they're not, my fantasy would be an organisation where everybody blogs and everybody blogs in public, and they are able to talk about the day-to-day stuff of how they conduct their business as a charity. And a friend of mine, Robert Patterson, once called this the intensity of the mundane. And it's kind of what works on the web. It's that routine stuff that is fascinating when you're on the outside, but you take for granted on the inside. So, for instance, Mark Charmer, a friend of mine who runs a charity called ACFO, a water-based development charity, just blogged about blogging and about the power of individuals within charities. And, blogging is the kind of old school, not so sexy platform, but actually a good, feisty, well thought out blog post can set out ripples into your network.
Yeah, non-profits have always need to show and to be transparent because of all the money they spend and everything, and social media is a good way for them to be even more transparent.
And many of them are still, again, like commercial organizations. I think a lot of big companies have realized that they've sort of paid agencies to tick the social box over the last couple of years, and are beginning to realize it's more complicated than that. So they're interested in how they can help their people become really connected with the outside world. And in some ways, charities are the same. They have these brands that they've developed over the years that they're desperate to protect. But increasingly, those brands actually just make us not trust them. What we want them to do is lower the curtain a little bit and let us see what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, going back to the content point, I think that content, content strategy isn't the sexiest subject in the world, but it is by far and away, what will run your social channels, especially on the day-to-day. I mean, we did a piece of work. We have a Facebook page, as you can imagine, and we did a piece of work where we analysed all of our data from 12 months worth of Facebook data to see what content worked best, the terminology, the time of day, days of the week, to educate that content strategy, but link it back to content. And I think something that we don't do often enough, we do it, but we don't do it often enough, and I don't think other organisations do, is actually use your community to help you make content too, and actually sort of see what the trends, and actually then make content. And we've done it a few times. There's one example of there's this BHF, British Heart Foundation diet, which isn't a British Heart Foundation diet. It's like lose 3 stone in a day or something. And people kept talking about it, and we as our team noticed this happening. So we started to use that insight to then make our own diet and then produce content that the community already wants. And I think that doesn't happen often enough, and we don't certainly do it enough, but we try.
Can I just, and this is not necessarily about you, Roberto, but take issue with the word content.
Sure.
Hallie Soup once said content is a pimp's word. And I kind of know what she meant, because in the world, and it was because she'd written a blog post that had been picked up by a newspaper or a journal and had been turned into content. And it's that sanitized, depersonalized, you're feeding content into this kind of machine. And it's the antithesis of people having genuine conversations with people in the outside world. So having a content strategy in a way is a warning bell for me, because you're already at one remove from genuine relationships.
Okay, so I won't speak about content strategy anymore. Okay, I got the point. What about competition? We saw new non-profits coming that have social media deep into the DNA. I don't forget charity water, exactly. Yeah. How do you see them?
I think we were talking about charity water earlier, actually, and I think it's interesting to see new organisations generally can be much more agile. I mean, organisations in the last 10 years compared to an organisation who's 50 years old can really use the tools and actually build a culture, which from the learnings of those years. And I think they do great stuff, and I think they are more open. I think it's very tough for a very sort of an older organisation, a bigger organisation, to do that. But yeah, I mean, challenges. I think that it's the non-profit market is a competitive market. Events in general are huge, and there's a lot of floating sort of fundraisers, and I think it is a competitive sort of area for sure. And yeah, with new organisations being able to be more agile and more customer social focused, I think that it's definitely one to watch, and I think Charity Water do it excellently. Yeah, and I think that from the sounds of it, they've got the culture right too.
You want to work?
Well, I was surprised at how competitive the world was when I got involved in it, and saddened to some extent, because there's so much opportunity, and there are so many people trying to learn how to do this stuff, that if they were willing to be maybe slightly less competitive and talk to each other more about how they do what they do and what works.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple. Yeah, no, I think it is a very competitive market. I think we share more than other sectors. I mean, there's loads of similar sort of talks that I've been to for non-profit tweet ups and stuff like that. That we share. There's a lot of sharing, and I think that is really important. Whether that sharing then equals change all the time, you have to go back to the organisations.
I think. Yeah. Sorry, but I just saw a tweet. I think it's really interesting. It's let's not forget that some of the best social media ideas come from non-profit.
Yeah,
so
well,
this
exactly.
Collaboration you're talking about is just.
Well, yeah, I mean, if there was recently a social media index, and 25% of the top 10 were non-profits. I think something that Euan mentioned before is actually key. Is that for a number of brands that are looking for an ideal to sell as a product, so charities have ideals already. That's you follow a charity, you believe in that. People shouldn't have heart disease, and I want to stop that. And I think charities can do that better than as you mentioned, it's sort of selling crisps. And I think that gives us a bit of a head start. Whether or not internally at other places they let the charities have that head start, I don't know. But yeah.
When will you do the first campaign on Kickstarter to raise more funds? Or is it something that has always been done by a non-profit? I don't know. I mean, crowdfunding is.
Yeah, no, there was a couple of crowdfunding. I mean, Cancer Research did this thing where it's not crowdfunding, but they sort of have all their number of projects, and then you could fundraise for a certain project. Mm-hmm. And then a charity in Scotland, I forget the name of, did something similar. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting space for sure.
Because Kickstarter and other platforms I think they've now made a standard, and the way they make people give money is really interesting, perhaps for non-profits.
Even things like Kiva is really interesting as well, because so much of the fundraising is just give us your money and then they disappear with it, and you don't know anymore. But with Kiva, you're getting a real engagement with the process, and you can see the money making its way through and doing some good. So the prospects for doing more of that are really, really good.
Yeah, we have just promotion. We had Kiva co-founder at LeWeb Paris. You can find it online. End of promotion. Go ahead.
I think gaming companies are interesting as well for charities, and gaming generally. And how charities can actually start to work with those companies. So I think that's interesting to watch. I've heard some interesting things potentially in the future. Because obviously I hate the word sort of gamification, but sort of using the game theory in terms of how to engage with people, and also to help them feel a part of your organisation, but then also to give, is a fascinating space, I think.
I was thinking about iHobo, which DePaul, a homeless agency in London, did, and it was an app for your iPhone that represented a homeless person that you kind of had to look after, and it was just really interesting, the mixed reactions to that. I mean, I personally felt slightly uncomfortable about having this homeless Tamagotchi in my pocket, so I didn't get warm to the idea. But it clearly raised the issue of homelessness for an awful lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I think there would be some interesting kind of ethical, moral aspects to gamification of charities.
Yeah, I think it was during South by Southwest. There was like homeless people who had Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
there's a line there, I think, as well for charities. You have to tread. So sometimes that is you have to take calculated risks for sure.
Okay, we're reaching the end. Perhaps a question for your future. What's next for BHF? What will be your next campaign?
The CPR campaign will be coming soon, and building on, probably the best campaign we've ever done, certainly one best that I've sort of been part of. And I think the next part is to sort of work closer to bring our supporters within the organisation, so that they can actually influence not only content, which you mentioned, but also
no content strategy
the culture, and I think that's important. But also, in recession, raising money is becoming harder and harder so that we can sort of spend it on research. So that's going to be a big challenge for us.
Do you want to have a final word for
Voice?
the audience?
Well, I mean, one of the things we're keen on is working out how to make this stuff happen without reverting to old ways of doing business. So talking about working in more networked ways, and some of the work that Sylvia's been doing is networking people involved in the NFP space and helping them work with each other. So trying to kind of move away from the discrete agency selling services to a particular client, and more towards networks of people being able to do stuff productively together.
Cool. Thank you very much for this conversation, all this content between us. Thank you.